The horseman appeared out of the Welsh mists. The slow gait and the arched neck of his horse indicated either hunger or exhaustion. The slumped posture of the rider begged the same question. Behind him stumbled a pack horse. Even though it did not appear to be heavily laden, it was obviously on its last legs. The picture made by the man and the horses was one of pure and utter dejection. The fact that the forest produced no sound, but the steady drip of water from the tree branches where it had collected added to the misery of the scene. No birds sang. An occasional raven could be seen all silently, malevolently, inspecting the small procession passing underneath them. The rider was slumped in his saddle, letting the horse follow any path it so desired, and did not see the dark gloom of the castle rise up before him as if by magic. The horse stopped at the huge obstacle in its path, snickered feebly but loud enough to draw the attention of the youth. His head came up and his eyes widened with sudden hope at the sight of the castle in front of him. But the drawbridge was up, and nary a light appeared from any of the towers. If there had been a poverty-stricken woodcutter's shack, it would have emanated more hospitality than came from the looming bulk of unforgiving stone that stood before him. Nevertheless, he was desperate. "Hello!" he called out, his young voice tiny in the space. "Guard? Anyone? I am a lost wanderer desperately in need of succor." But no sound came from the castle. No light appeared. He continued to call, but his voice began to weaken. He finally came to the conclusion that any garrison that inhabited the castle might be off raiding somewhere, and that the guards left to raise the drawbridge were sleeping. He was well aware that his only hope of survival lay in finding some human habitat. For days he had been lost and the mountainous country had provided little in the way of food for him or his horses. He finally decided to make camp there. It was senseless to travel anywhere else, and the clear light of day might make his presence noticeable. He was just about to get down from the saddle, when the light from a flickering torch appeared on the battlements, and a silent hooded figure looked down on him. He called up, "Please, guard, for the love of heaven, grant me entrance. I have been lost for a long time, and you are the first human creature I have set eyes on in these many days. I am not a guard, young sir. I am the lady of the castle, and I am afraid that I may not allow you to enter. We are nothing here but a house of helpless women subject to the domination of any man strong enough to force his will upon us." He let out a small snort of disbelief. "Madam? I do not have the strength at the moment to have a kitten do my bidding, let alone an adult being woman or not. Please grant me your hospitality. I swear upon my knighthood that I will do you no harm." Even as far above him as she was, he saw her draw her cloak about her in a manner that suggested his statement was of great import to her. She called down, "Aha! One of Arthur's Round Table of which I have heard so much. No mistress, but like those under his command, I have decided to seek the Holy Grail. Have sworn a great oath to dedicate my life to such. I have only recently won my knight's spurs, so do this in the hopes that my search will elevate me in the eyes of lords and ladies of the land." "Wonderful! You have your armor, good knight?" "Yes, mistress." "Indeed I do. A knight without his armor is no knight at all." "True. But tell me, are you valorous? Are you a champion of the jousting? Do you tilt at the ring? The manly sports in which knights strive to excel like swordsmanship and archery?" He drew himself up in his saddle. "I may be a mere stripling, my lady, but hold myself competent in all the manly arts." In the dark above, he saw the sudden gleam of white teeth. "Sir Knight? Would you be so disposed to act as the champion of this castle? Protect the feeble womankind in residence here, if so asked?" "I have taken the knight's oath of chivalry, mistress." "Of course I would. Then enter, Sir Knight, and partake of what poor hospitality this poor damsel-ridden edifice may offer." For the first time in what must have been a week, the young man smiled. "Your servant, mistress," he called out. "Ah, but an agreement must be made between us, Sir Knight. Do you agree?" I am your humble servant, mistress. I do not require humbleness in my champions, Sir Knight. I simply require that you defend this castle and my honor with manly skills. If your skills are insufficient for this task, then you may be my humble servant. His brain, stultified with the misery of the last week and lack of comfort, would not serve him. He stared up at this imposing woman, eyes glazed. I know not of what you speak, mistress. Please forgive me. She glared down at the young man. At the moment, I, as mistress of this castle, a mere woman, am the champion. As such, you must defeat me in a competition of manly skills. If you cannot, then you are no man to defend this castle's honor, and you will agree that your proper place is amongst my handmaidens as one of them. He smiled, though weakly. I meant no such thing. Surely you jest, mistress. I could not make contest with a woman. I kneel before you, a humble knight at your service. You say then, Sir Knight, that I could best you? In womanly virtues and in kindness, mistress. The feminine virtues. Sir Knight? I desire a champion who will represent this castle on the fields of chivalrous competition. Not in feminine virtues. One who is tried and true. A manly representative. If you cannot best me, you think that I should consider placing the fortunes of all the weak womenfolk here under your care? He looked up at her, confusion written deeply into his brow. I know not how to respond to you, mistress. Surely you do not consider a knight who would compete against a woman such as yourself worthy of being champion of your castle? Indeed, Sir Knight, I do. Wouldn't have me choose a champion simply for his being a male? Surely, I should have some confidence in his manliness, his ability in warlike activities. I have no other male worthy of competing against you, so what am I, a poor woman, to do? He pondered, doubt written all over his face. Then his visage cleared as if the sun shone upon him. Yes, mistress. I can see how it would be done. Once it was proved that I was your superior in any of the events, I would stay my hand, back off and kneel humbly at your feet. There was a pause as she reflected upon his statement. Yes, Sir Knight. That is most gentlemanly of you. Accepted. I state formally that if you are to be my champion, I will house you like any lord for any period of time that you feel proper. If, however, you fail, you will become my handmaiden for as long as I deem suitable. This is acceptable to you? He smiled, his teeth white in what was now darkness. Your servant mistress acceptable. She did not smile in return. Very well, Sir Knight. Welcome. As she spoke, the castle lights blazed and his view of the place was transformed. Brightness prevailed. The drawbridge began to lower. Sounds of celebration and music, sweet music, played upon the air that no longer seemed dank and desolate. Then the chains rattling, the portcullis was raised. As he sat in his saddle, transfixed, he saw the large group of comely maidens who waited in glee within the castle courtyard, their silk and satin gowns busily reflecting the flickering torchlights as they danced and sang sweet melodies. He had never envisaged such a welcome in all of his young years. Blushing, he urged his tired steed across the drawbridge, towards the comely tumult, his eyes blurred with the beauty and merriment of the sight before him. Once over the drawbridge, the portcullis lowered and the drawbridge slowly raised itself behind him, cutting him off from all his previous life. Flutes, lyres, and castanets came to a crescendo and stopped suddenly as the lady of the castle finally made her entrance to the scene. He identified her by the deference shown by all of the other young ladies, who parted ranks to let her approach him. He also saw that she was still wearing the bulky hooded cape that she had worn to the battlements, but he could now see that it was a rich lustrous, scarlet, velvet which served to dramatize the blackness of her beautiful hair and a pair of the brightest, most intense, dark eyes he had ever seen. She smiled up at him, showing strong white teeth. "Welcome, young sir. I hope you will excuse my initial inhospitable behavior, but a domicile such as this, comprised of helpless young women? One cannot be too careful. Of course, mistress, he answered gallantly. I just fervently desire that you find me a worthy champion to defend your honor. I am sure that we shall, she said formally. But now, Sir Knight, if you will dismount, I will have your steed and your pack horse taken care of. Some of my ladies can then escort you to your quarters. While you bathe, I shall have the kitchen make a meal, suitable for a hungry man. At the mention of food, his mouth began to water. He wanted nothing more than to rush into the dining hall and eat everything in sight, cooked or not, hot or cold. At the same time, he knew that this would be most discourteous to his hostess. Accordingly, as he dismounted, he smiled. Thank you, mistress. Your hospitality is only exceeded by your beauty. The young women around him tittered behind their hands at his gallantry, but the hostess's eyes suddenly flashed. Thank you, kind sir. I am the Lady Rowena, mistress of this castle. The ladies surrounding you are my attendants. You shall meet them as you settle. Please feel free to call upon anyone in my household for any assistance you desire. He bowed deeply. Your humble servant, mistress. I am known as Cedric de Boisvert. Until I won my spurs, I was equerry to the knight, Sir Gaston of Kent. He generously allowed me to leave his service in search of fame and fortune. She smiled a cold smile. Well, perhaps you will find your fame and fortune while residing with us. Now, if you will go with my attendants, we can start making you comfortable. There was something intimidating about this lady, he thought. She certainly bore no resemblance to the sweet young maidens he had met before, certainly not dainty or submissive. She was, he thought, perhaps bigger than him, but not much. Very attractive. At the same time, she gave off an aura of confidence that he had only beheld in high-ranking males. Anyway, he thanked her and she told two of her women to escort him. The two young women escorting him were sumptuously dressed in silken fabrics and dainty slippers. They were shining with health and good spirits and chattered to him as they led him. He was continuously surprised at the richness of the castle interior. The walls hung with iridescent tapestries, and bright torches were aflame at regular enough intervals that the light provided was more than adequate. He wondered to himself at the obvious riches displayed. This would be an amazing prize for any predator. Saw why the Lady Rowena was so interested in having a knight for a champion, knowing full well that if any evil lord tried to take the castle, the presence of a true knight would be a deterrent, as disagreements were often settled by a contest of champions, one from each opposing side. He was led into another beautiful room, tapestries on the walls, floor comforting to the feet with a carpet of fresh reeds, a fire roaring in a corner, and something he had heard of but never seen outside of Camelot, a bathtub. Even as he and his companions entered, they were passed by a large number of maidservants carrying panniers of hot water, which they immediately dumped into the tub, then left. He had never had a bath indoors in his life, and was somewhat afraid of this development, but did not wish to lower himself in his companions' eyes, so thanked them politely and waited for them to leave. They seemed able to read his mind though, looking downwards modestly and explaining that their orders had been to undress him and assist him into the bath. He was shocked by this and protested that he could not sully their young eyes with male nudity, but they pleaded with him, saying that when Lady Rowena gave orders, it was most unwise to refuse, or modify, them in any way. They seemed genuinely frightened, so he allowed himself to be undressed and ushered into the warm water. The young ladies behaved in a most modest, seemly fashion, but he could have sworn that more than once, quick glances were thrown in the directions of his genitals. Blushing because of this, he quickly stepped into, then sat down in the bath. The warmth of the bath water relaxed him immediately. He almost swooned with delight, as his head sagged back against the back of the cavity within which he lay. "Wonderful!" he exclaimed. "What will they think of next?" Enervated, he wasn't quite as quick to relax when he realized that the two maidens were actually washing him. He tried to protest, but they just giggled quietly and easily avoided his attempts to ward them off with his arms. They added something to the water, rose petals? But he was unsure and sleepy, and ended up lying luxuriating in the warm water, the two women now lathering him then rinsing him off with fresh slightly cool water. His hair was washed a number of times, and rinsed, then scrubbed dry with some sort of magical material that seemed to soak the water right off of his hair. The maidens demurely assisted him from the bath, again averting their eyes as they handed him a lightweight robe of some silken material to hide his nakedness. He had never before worn silk, and the lightness and freshness of the material astounded him. He was wondering what had happened to his clothes when the Lady Rowena appeared in the room, carrying clothes of many hues and colors. She smiled serenely at him. "Ah, Sir Cedric, you are indeed a comely youth. Have you reached your maturity yet?" "Yes, mistress. I celebrated my 21st birthday some 6 months past, just after the feast of St. Stephen's," he replied. "Well, Sir Knight, I hope you will not be displeased with me when I say that you could easily pass for a callow youth, even a boy. I must chastise some of my young ladies, I'm afraid. I would wager that many of them outweigh you. I may have to limit their partaking of food and drink. Put the hussies to work." She smiled affectionately at the young ladies who had helped him, so he knew that she was playing with their affections. They blushed prettily and looked downward in pretended mortification. He was blushing just as prettily at her comment. "It has been the bane of my life, mistress, always looking much younger than I am, and I have been much subjected to masculine ridicule because of it." She sighed. "You will not be subjected to ridicule in this house, Sir Knight. To womankind, it is a compliment much sought after. To us, appearance is much to be prized, and the appearance of youth is the most sought after prize of all, our holy grail, so to speak. So you will not think ill of us if we attempt to make you as attractive a male as we can? You are such a novelty to us, that you have all my young ladies sighing most rapturously and working out strategies to meet or talk to you." He smiled shyly. "I believe there is a saying, mistress? A lady cannot make a silk purse out of a sow's ear? I doubt that you can make much of the sow's ear before you." Her eyes flashed in the manner that they had earlier. "We shall see, Sir Knight. We shall see." She paused. "But first, I must have you fed. A proper hostess would see to it that you would be fed here in this room, but I am afraid that all of my ladies would mutiny if I were to do such a thing, so I must ask you to hike to the dining room. But before I do, let me explain those clothes here." She pointed to the glowing pile of satins and laces that she had brought with her, and laid down on a nearby bench. He smiled. "I am not really in need of borrowing clothes, mistress. I am not by any means well provided with rich garments, but do have enough that will suffice in my panniers that were carried by my pack-horse. These will suffice. Of that I am sure." He saw the anger that was quickly suppressed on her face and spoke hurriedly. "I mean no offense, my lady. I just see no reason to impose on your hospitality." Her look softened. "I would ask a boon, Sir Knight." What else could a chivalrous knight answer? "Granted, my lady," he said positively. Her look was one of embarrassment, but young as he was, he felt somehow, as this was only for show. "Well, Cedric, I have to admit that the young ladies of my court, being without young males around." She paused. "Yes, my lady? Make pretend. Write small plays, and being young ladies? Needs must, that young males play large parts in these proceedings. That would stand to reason, my lady, but where do those young men come from?" She smiled. "The young ladies dress as males, using the likes of these garments to present themselves as such. That is why I have brought them to you for your use." He smiled. "Nay, mistress, I can see immediately that these garments are much too rich in texture for a lowly knight. Far too princely for the likes of me. But I would consider it such a boon, young man. Your coming to this castle has stirred a great deal of interest amongst my ladies. The wearing of these clothes is a matter of great consequence to them. May I ask why, my lady?" "Of course. You see, the clothes you opt to wear will pass the test of having been approved by a real man. This will automatically provide an accolade to both the seamstress who made them and the girl who wore them in the past. And anyway, I hope I do not appear too forward, but even as we speak, all of your clothes are being laundered. They cannot be hung out to dry until after daybreak tomorrow morning, so for modesty alone, I urge you to choose from amongst what I have brought for you. He inclined his head. I shall, of course, bow to your wishes, mistress. Wonderful. Now, one other favor I ask of you, young man. Your servant, my lady. Many of the young ladies who play the part of males will be watching you very closely to see how a real male behaves. In terms of voice, your carriage, your demeanor. I understand. I shall present my masculinity in the best way I can. She pursed her lips. That is not exactly what I am requesting. I simply would like you to confirm that the girls who play the male parts are not to be humbled by any derogatory comments or behavior from you. I would never dream of doing such a thing, mistress. Wonderful, sir. You are most kind. But I must go now. We shall meet in the dining hall shortly? It will be my pleasure, mistress. He answered. But embarrassment followed immediately after he started to choose what clothes he was to wear. Yes, there were trousers, but they were of lustrous velvet or satin, with inserts of silk, or other feminine fabrics which he could not identify. The shirts were of translucent silk, often with lace collars. Underclothes were of the same material, also trimmed with lace. He felt decidedly strange once dressed in the articles of his choosing. He finally opted for trousers in blue satin that were held up by a pink sash at the waist, with legs that tied just below the knee with matching ribbons. A white blouse that displayed his lacy underclothes. White hose held in place with garters. Pink velvet slippers. The only way he could have looked less effeminate, he thought, was to wear a dress. But then the girls worked on his hair, forming 2 braids that fell down past his shoulders, then tying them with satin ribbons that matched his trousers. Then, explaining that his white complexion needed to be made more masculine, the girls used cosmetics that reddened his lips and his cheeks. Used another to darken his eyes, chattering about how handsome he was. Once he arrived in the dining hall, he found himself amongst a sea of womankind, amongst whom he found about 5 young ladies, all wearing clothes similar to his own and cosmetics like his. They also had their hair styled like his, and all wore blue satin ribbons to hold the braids. He then noticed that the other women treated them as if they were males, deferring to them at all times. They seemed not in the slightest masculine to him, though he kept his counsel and said nothing that could be interpreted as being derogatory. Naturally, Lady Rowena sat at the top of the table, with him at her right hand. She smiled at him. You are very handsome, young knight. Those clothes are most becoming. You recognize the other males amongst us, I assume? Yes, mistress, of course. They would be hard to miss. He replied gallantly. She smiled and leaned forward, covering his hand with hers. After your hunger has been assuaged, perhaps you would like to join the other men? That would be most entertaining, he said. The meal he ate was most satisfying, a large bowl of soup, then a large portion of fowl, then fruits the likes which he had never seen before, all served up attractively and accompanied by goblets of wine. He drank far more than he was capable of handling. He found himself drowsily sitting amongst a large group of chattering women, finding it more and more difficult to stay awake. He wasn't aware of when the Lady Rowena disappeared, but suddenly, he found himself awake and surrounded only by the other men. One of them is shaking his arm. Sir Knight? Sir Knight, are you in your cups, sir? After only a few glasses of wine? We are astounded. Surely you have a manly tolerance for wine? We have many ladies at this court who can imbibe more. He felt diminished by her comment. I apologize, sir, he said. But my tiredness has probably been generated by my being lost for days before my arrival here tonight. You were lost, sir? Around here? Being lost is a woman's prerogative, I thought. Another of the young women said, then tittered along with all of the others. Perhaps the Lady Rowena has brought a damsel into the castle to make a jest of us? He'd make a pretty girl, I think. This was another girl now, peering closely at him. A prettier girl than you made Elena. Another teased. I care not what picture I'd make as a girl, the one peering at him retorted. I care only about my manly appearance. He felt hounded and by a bunch of what could only be described as pretty girls in effeminate clothes, boasting of their masculinity while deriding his. He wished to laugh, but remembering his vow to Lady Rowena, desisted. Perhaps, if he were to walk the length of the room and back, we could determine if he has womanish tendencies, one said. A few clapped in appreciation, so despite his natural shyness and one or two mild protests, within moments of her suggestion, he walked modestly to the far wall, then returned, feeling their eyes fixed on him all of the way. The women were all staring at him as he came back to the group, eyes wide in astonishment, then burst into unrestrained laughter. His fair skin turned brick red, and his eyes watered with embarrassment. Pray tell, ladies? Why the mirth? They almost managed to stop laughing and one started to speak, then giggled, and a gale of laughter swept through them again. He stood helplessly before them for what seemed like an eternity until the laughter subsided, still blushing. The one known as Elena came and linked her arm to his. Started walking him away from the rest. Forgive us, kind sir? Generating another ripple of laughter. We are isolated here from menfolk in this castle, but I assure you, we remember quite well how true males walk. Methinks that Lady Rowena will be most disappointed that we discovered her ploy so easily and so quickly. He shook his head, thoroughly confused. I know not what ye mean, mistress. Without warning, she swung around her dainty hand and slapped him hard on his face. The sound echoed throughout the room and she now stood before him, furious. How dare you? Mistress indeed. You come into our presence boasting of your masculinity, then prove your true gender by an inability to walk in the manner befitting a man. Then, to divert our scrutiny, you offend me by calling me mistress. You may dress like a male, have your hair done in a male style, and wear male ribbons, but you are either a mollycoddle or just a damsel in disguise. Admit it! His face burning from the force of the slap, he just stared at her for a moment, then found his tongue. I meant no offense, kind sir. My humble apologies. Please forgive my bad manners. She drew herself up, but started to smile. Very well. Spoken most prettily. You truly wish my forgiveness? Oh yes, sir, he said. By my sword, I would. She tittered. Would mean more if you swore an oath on your sewing needle, methinks. Then her face grew firm. Very well. You wish my forgiveness? Curtsy to me. He was totally confused. What could he have possibly done to offend this lady, and as he could easily tell her companions, faltered, I know not how to curtsy me, sir. Stopping in confusion at nearly repeating his previous faux pas. Be quiet and do as I say, she said imperiously. Do not keep me waiting. To his own amazement he reacted to her command, taking the sides of his satin breeches in his hands and dipped in servile obedience to the young woman in front of him. To his relief, she beamed and he heard the others applaud and approach him in a friendly manner. Very well done, maiden. I mean, sir, she giggled as the others crowded around them. Now why do we not reverse this piece of trickery that Mistress Rowena has tried to entertain herself with? He was just as puzzled as the girls who surrounded them. I know not what you mean, sire, he said. Why? To teach you to behave like a real man should. This way, she'll think that her devious charade has been successful. At a later point, we can then reveal that we have been aware of her trickery and we all shall have a jolly laugh together. As the others applauded her devious plan, he immediately saw the advantage in it for him. He had not paid the slightest attention to the way the men had been walking earlier and, obviously, missed some behavior pattern that they strongly associated with masculinity. Now, He would learn how to act in the desired fashion by being trained in their idea of manly grace by them. He would be able to pass as one of them far more easily. Lady Rowena would be most impressed. But we must make haste. The ladies shall be rejoining us soon, someone said, and they set to work. He was amazed at the gait they expected him to use while walking. One hand on the hip, the other straight out in front, the wrist bent enough to open the hand, but the fingers gracefully together. Small steps, feet placed directly in front of each other. Head erect. It did not take him long to master this, and then they started in on how he should be acting at the table. Various conversational gambits. How to cough discreetly. How to act in a most manly manner. Just as he finally got the male's approval, the ladies joined them. As he was now sitting close to where his companions were seated, he had to rise and walk down to his previous seat when the ladies returned. Lady Rowena had a strange expression on her face as he minced towards her, but simply nodded as he sat down beside her. The hour was late and he was sleepy again, apologizing again and again but using the techniques that the men had impressed upon him. He thought he had performed well when she said, "Sir Knight, our repast is over and the bedchamber beckons. May I make one small last request of you?" He almost forgot to flutter his wrist in the way that he'd been taught, but remembered just in time. "Of course, mistress. What may I do? Please go to your erstwhile male companions. Escort them back to me." Silence fell on the whole assembly as he walked back down to where the men were sitting. They all stood as he reached them and turned and led them back as a group towards Lady Rowena. The tittering began almost immediately. Concentrating solely on remembering how to walk properly, it took him a while to realize that while he was mincing along in a most effeminate manner, his companions were strolling along beside him in a manner identical to confident young men. Totally confused, he came to a stop facing Lady Rowena. She looked up at him with blazing eyes. "Is this the way you appreciate my hospitality? Mocking the young ladies who entertain my castle by attempting to pass as males? Has the wine relaxed you inasmuch that you now demonstrate your tendencies to be a mollycoddle? A simpering imitation of a woman?" He licked his lips desperately. "But mistress, my behavior is not intended as any kind of mockery. These young ladies—" "Stop!" Lady Rowena ordered him, her hand up. "Did I not request a boon of you early this evening? You gave me your word, which obviously means naught. You are no knight, sir." "Knight, mistress? He is no knight." Elena slapped him. Then, instead of acting like a male, he curtsied to her. "Like a maid," one of the young men interrupted sneeringly. Lady Rowena stood, her anger replaced by curiosity. "Is this charge true? Were you slapped in a manner that would normally call for a duel between men?" "Yes, mistress, but—" He was stopped by her upthrust hand. "And, instead of laying down a challenge, did you instead curtsy to the person who treated you thus?" "My lady, I can explain." "Did you curtsy?" she thundered. "Yes." He stood, face down in shame as he heard her next words. "Ladies? Take this mollycoddle here and dress him in more appropriate garments. I'm thinking that silks, velvet, and satins will be more conducive to his new career in this household. Be also sure you can teach him the artifices you use to convert your complexions into something more ladylike. He shall make a pretty handmaiden, methinks." He shed a helpless tear as the group of chattering young girls surrounded him and led him out of the great hall, much to the merriment of those remaining, as he slowly disappeared from view into a sea of femininity. Alan sat with Sue, the assistant to Helen Gaunt, the star who played the part of Lady Rowena in the film they'd been watching. "She wants my whole part cut out, Sue? But why? Don't you think I was okay as Cedric?" Sue nodded. "For what it's worth, you were damn good. Okay, the part was one that wouldn't appeal to most guys, but you carried it well. I think you'd have been noticed okay. It's the kind of role that gets an unknown some juicy parts downstream." I mean, that scene we shot today that we're still waiting on the rushes for? You were a terrific-looking girl. I mean, I even heard some of the electricians whistling at you. He rocked from side to side, hugging himself. Yes, okay. But that's gonna get cut too by the sound of it. But can she do this? Does she have the clout? Is there anyone else I can talk to? Go over her head? I didn't hear that last bit. Trying to get me canned? She asked with some heat. Can she do this? Bet you're sweet as she can. Her contract gives her the power to do just about any damn thing she wants on the set. I'd talk to your agent if I were you. I don't have an agent, Sue. This is the first decent-sized part I've ever had. Didn't need one to get it. Miss Gaunt really seemed hot to get me hired after my screen test. Why is she doing this now? Sue shrugged. Want to talk to her? I can maybe pull a few strings. But you'll owe me. Jesus, Sue. Will you? I'll owe you all right, big time. He stood up, literally panting with excitement. Helen Gaunt received them in the library of the house she had rented while making the movie. There were signs that packing was underway. The last shots had been finished, but she explained that she was hanging around for a day or so in case some dubbing had to be performed. She was very elegant in a white pantsuit with a scarlet silk shell and stiletto-heeled shoes to match. She pointed to a chair in front of where she sat. Smiled. Why don't you sit there, Alan? Sue, make us a drink, will you? Want a drink, Alan? No thanks, Miss Gaunt. I just wanted to ask you why. Why I'm cutting your part. Yes. I mean, I know that I don't know as much as you do about movies, but that part means an awful lot to me. She shrugged. Name of the game, I'm afraid. The reason you're being cut? Very complicated, and frankly, I don't have the time to explain it. But Sue tells me that you don't have an agent? That's true. He said. An agent is awfully hard to get when you're an unknown like me. She thought for a second. Well, you definitely show signs of talent. If you want, I'll sign you on, but I must get total exclusivity. I control everything you work at from now on. Take me on as my agent, he said, licking his lips, eyes gleaming. Sure. As it happens, I've got the papers right here. Want to sign them? He jumped up from the chair and followed her to the table. Did not read what she put in front of him, just signed one paper after another. When he had finished and she'd put the papers away, he asked, Does this mean my part stays in? No. Sorry. But I've got another job for you. Great. But does it start soon, Miss Gaunt? I'm broke. As a matter of fact, your timing is incredibly good. You can start right away. She smiled at Sue. Sue smiled back. Come on. I'll take you to your room. My room. Wow, he said, excited still as the two women led him down a hallway and opened a door into a bedroom. There were some clothes lying on top of the bed, black and white. Looked like a dress, but other than that, the room was very clean and tidy. Miss Gaunt walked over to a dressing table and picked up what appeared to be a perfume bottle. Started walking back towards him, opening it and flipping it with her hand to get some on her finger. The scent filled the air. Very pretty, he thought. Then she was standing in front of him, smiling with a predatory look in her eyes. Gently stroking her fingertip behind his ear and then the other. Taking his wrists, and applying the perfume there as well. There you are, Elena. Hope you like that name. I picked it especially for you. Now put on your pretty uniform and apron and don't forget the cap. Report back out to me when you're ready. I'm really sure that you'll do very well in this, your first job for me. If you are, I'll see about getting you a part in another movie one of these days. So, get yourself dressed, huh? I've got lots of things you can help me with. He looked at the black satin uniform dress that Sue was holding up against herself, while smiling at him, making kittle-kissing motions with her lips as she did so. "Yeah, Elena, I hope you haven't forgotten how to curtsy," Miss Gaunt said as she left the room, and both women laughed.